And we're back. Today we're doing Nasir and Khalid. Khalid's Moses.
And good morning, or whatever time it is around there. I'm Falconer 111.
I'm Mycroft Holmes, but you probably knew that if you were watching the series.
Nasir!
You can actually
Nasir!
purchase Nasir's dance as an emote.
Boss.
It's a premium emote, so you need
Hey,
to
hey,
spend
hey,
real
the
money.
cavalry. Play ball.
Yeah, well,
Nice catch.
I
Like to
mean,
play
yeah.
ball? Come. I
I,
show you.
I wonder how many people actually did
C4.
buy it.
Good shit.
Because,
Mesa
like,
made.
I
We
see people
managed to get
using it
shipment
when I'm
though.
in
Now it
Agartha.
is my
there you
job to
go.
prep it.
Never
Like
mind then.
Sly and
Because
demolish
you
the
never
man.
know when
I need you to start
how
building up,
this
Nasir.
is gonna actually hit a fan base.
She is, how you say, tough cookie. It is in her blood. Our blood.
Yeah.
We are Maria, the young warriors, and we die hard like Bruce
We're
Willis.
just
I love
yeah.
Nasir. I love
Motherfucker!
Nasir.
Our enemy, they use the water
Yeah.
pumps to spread
This
their
is
black
we. I think we've
disease.
already
They
seen
pump
them doing
cancer
this,
into the water, into
and
the
this will not be the
soil,
last
the
time we see
food
them doing
supply.
this.
Soon
Just like
everybody will be like them. The
use
walking dead
pumping filth
with
into
octopus
things.
fingers in their head.
Yup.
Very bad.
Have we
Now,
just like
boss,
I
we
remember
are
seeing
going blue.
speculation on the
We will
internet that
disable the pumps,
um,
stop the pollution.
each age is
Boom!
defined either
Just
by the
like Bollywood
prominence
movies with
of
happy ending and
some
musical number.
kind of energy source or the dominance of another one. And the first stage was the birth of arcane energy, which is with the host and all of that, all of the ancient creation magic. The second age is arcane energy with hell. The third age is the transition uh, between arcane and anima, like arcane energy and anima. Fourth age right now is anima, and fifth age is when we transition into dark, like energy that is filth
Additional
energy.
assignment received. Initiate
So who
flight.
knows?
I have seen a crossover of this with Mass Effect,
I
and
can
it posited the future of this system is Guy essentially just mass awakens everyone. And the world essentially goes through a huge convulsion as everyone is mass awakened to fight the filth.
mhm. I
And
can
we win, but in the process, the old conspiracies are destroyed by the newly awakened bees.
yeah, I can absolutely imagine. Is that any? Was it? I think I've seen that actually. Was it any good?
I liked it. There was a couple of chapters that was very good that was set on Omega, that followed a quarry and sort of reacting to these weirdos who build golems and are similarly poor and oppressed.
Hmm.
But the reason I remember is they go into the fact bees can resurrect because she essentially has to get them off the station by carrying their body parts in a duffel bag so she can get them to another animal well where they can resurrect and be fine
Yeah,
because they're wanted by one of the gangs.
yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
And
But
yep,
there's
that's another player. We kind of sort of interact with them. I don't know if they type anything because I don't pay attention to that. But they do one of the same quests that we're doing.
Mhm.
That's me just looking for them.
I've seen some this the like how fan fiction gets really existential sometimes and it'll get very meta.
Oh, absolutely.
That's most of the fan fiction I've seen for this thing. It's just like for Secret World, it's just like what is it like? What does it do to your psyche for you to casually kill yourself in order to travel faster? And the answer is always nothing good, but in different entertaining ways. Also, I think I mentioned this, like in the last incarnation of the LP, so to speak. I did read one about Marianne Chen, just with struggling with crazy PTSD after making it back to the mainland. And that was a good one. That was actually genuinely good.
Marianne Chen is the lady
CDC.
who's in the... Oh, okay.
The CDC lady wouldn't take her thing off, so to
Of
speak.
course not.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I hope they they just
As we saw,
grind.
as we saw in the Vanishing of Tyler Freeborn section of uh, Kingsmouth, everyone on that island is fucked.
I mean, possibly. You're assuming that the filth can be. Filth is telling us the complete unvarnished
Relied
truth.
upon to tell the truth.
Yeah.
But we also have the evidence from the laboratory, the blood samples.
Yeah. But we also have I know this is only so good as in-game evidence. You also have the ability to take the deputy and use him as an agent in the minigame thing, and just send him around.
I
Whatever.
haven't gotten him as a drop yet.
Also, I think.
By the way, if you are playing this game and are looking for level up advice, you want to use quest rewards to level up your gear until they're yellow, and from then on you want to solely use the results you get from Patreon boxes and the minigame. Because it is literally impossible to get anywhere with how little experience the basic drops give you.
Mhm.
Like, because you need shards, anima shards to upgrade.
Mhm.
And the only way to get anima shards is to sell stuff and to do quests. And there literally aren't enough quests that give enough anima shards to do that sort of thing. See, I got 650 for this quest. That doesn't really get better. This is me looking at my inventory and going, okay, I need to sell some of this stuff. I need to use some of this stuff.
Yeah. The secret world can do many things right, but even its equipment has never been one of them. Not in the old version, and I don't know. I think it looks better in the new one, but also looks still very clunky. And I remember.
Clunky is the fucking stealth in this game.
I mean, yeah, that's
from one
true.
of the previous episodes, that is just not fun. And getting those achievements for stealth is just, oh my god, there's a reason I don't even try.
And,
of course it's called Demolition
yeah,
Man.
Of course it is. Mm-hmm. But at least
something.
At least it's not the original crafting system for this game, which was impenetrable.
Oh yeah.
I never made heads or tails of it. I gave up. I'd go back, try, fail, and then give up again, over and over again.
There is much left to do. We are not yet victorious.
Shani is always worried. It is her job.
Now we learn a little about Nasir's backstory.
Me? I'm young. I still believe in victory. I may look like I'm not serious.
Wait, is his...
My sister was eaten by a beast from the mountains. My mother was taken by cultists when I was 11. My father died trying to save her. I am very
dark.
serious.
Though I will say, does he have tan lines around his glasses?
I think he might.
I think that's what those were. That seems very on brand.
The sands of battle are always shifting. Your assistance is of great value.
I like Nasir's view on things. You know, I had a lot of tragedy in my life, but if we can't have joy and dance, there's no point in living.
Got to the series.
They are here now, boss.
Yeah, and that's fair. And it's a healthier outlook than getting caught up in things.
I believe that is the traditional Jewish outlook on things.
I mean, well, we complain about it too much for it to be too, complaining about things is an ancient and storied part of Jewish culture. That's
an inherent part of your religion is the arguing.
Yeah.
From what you told me. So.
Yeah. Let me put it this way. Judaism is a very, very old religion, and it takes pride in preserving old things, but it also constantly renews itself because it has a structure in place it uses to question itself. And we value our ability to constantly question things that we say and we think, and we believe and we do. But since all of that takes place within a framework, we keep it constantly evolving without disrupting that continuity of identity. That without having to like destroy old things for the sake of them being old, while we're trying to renew things because things have gotten stuck. And in a way, it's a lot like how a democracy
It reminds
functions.
me of a alternate history timeline, where it was essentially saying, what if Jesus was never born? And it posited another Jewish revolt followed by a reformed Judaism, which I thought was a very interesting concept.
That's an.
I don't know if that I don't know if that like offends you or anything.
No, it doesn't.
I just thought it was a very interesting concept to see.
Because, I mean, strictly speaking, that did happen. That's what the Talmud was. That's what Talmudic scholarship was. Like, it did happen in Roman Judea. Like, the diaspora did drive a huge number of people out. There were Jews that stuck around, and there were plenty of Jews. Like, okay, so did I talk to you about the fall of the Old Kingdom and the Exilarch? Fall of the Northern Kingdom.
I do not believe you have. I'm mostly familiar with modern Judaism coming from the diaspora that took a lot of influence from was it Persia they fled to?
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Because
Okay.
like this isn't look, the term diaspora was originally invented to describe Jews, the Jewish Jews spreading out from Israel, but from Judea. But it isn't even the first time. Like, we had basically huge chunks of the community were taken away by, I think it was the Assyrians, and moved into what's now modern northern central Iraq-ish. And they settled there, and ended up calling it the Babylonian captivity, and probably the Babylonians. And that's where the bulk of the group that's there were a couple groups that stayed behind. One of the groups is called the Samaritans. They're and they're still around. There's a few thousand of them. If you've ever heard the Good Samaritan story, the whole idea behind that is that to the Jews of 2nd century AD Judea, the Samaritans were people they didn't like, were their rivals. So the idea of a good Samaritan being something that stands out, something that is exceptional, is what's supposed to make that parable stick in your head. But that's where that community took shape out elsewhere, and then only came back later after, if you've ever heard of Cyrus the Great, who took over Persia. He gave Jews permission to go back, and as Jews often do, they commemorated that by letting them people name their kids after him, which is something that is actually kind of complicated and kind of big in Judaism, because people are only supposed to name their children after lost relatives or beloved family members who've died. Same thing, by the way, happened to Alexander the Great. So there are a lot of Jews who are named Alexander. Not as much Cyrus anymore, but that's how the name Cyrus got into American culture, and now it's just kind of associated with hillbillies. But that's how it made it all the way over from Persia to Alabama. But there was a community that stayed behind when Jews were allowed back into Judea. And they stuck around and all over northern Iraq. They eventually, we don't know when this came into place, but there was an office called the Exilarch in Greek, which is where they got the name from. They had their own name that I don't know off the top of my head, which was it was sort of a hereditary priesthood that claimed descent from the claim descent from like I think they were Kohanes, or either that or the biblical kings, like Saul and David and such. And we know they were in place by the 600s AD, and they were actually the community was there for years. They got important during the Muslim era. And they were to the point where it was a salary government position that advised the caliphs for a while in Baghdad. And then the Mongols came through, burned Baghdad to the ground, and mostly scattered that community and killed off the exilarchs. But that community stuck around until just around the formation of Israel, there were a lot of Jewish communities that ended up fleeing for a bunch of reasons that we won't go into here because it's politically controversial. But I mean, like that community, that community that stayed behind, it got really small over time, but they never really died out. Like I can't remember, I've forgotten his name, which is frustrating. But like there was a guy, I think there was an Iraqi Jew who emigrated to Britain, and he was made a baron in like the early 2000s or the early aughts. And he's descended from that community. They never went anywhere, but they didn't get they never reached the level of prominence that, like, different shards of the diaspora, the second diaspora after, getting driven out of Judea a second time, ended up taking root elsewhere and growing much larger. That's
the Sephardim, the Ashkenazi, and the rest.
Yeah, and there's a billion other different subgroups.
Those are pretty much the only ones I'm familiar with, and that's
did I ever tell
mostly because I read a time travel story set in 1630s Germany.
Yeah.
The 1632 series, and one of the
there's
Jewish. So there's a
good.
lot of Jewish history in there.
That's a good series. I really like it.
Yeah.
And it is.
That's how I learned about the. Yeah, that's how I learned about the Abravanel family and Sephardim Ashkenazi and all that sort of stuff.
They do take liberties, but then they kind of admit it, so you have to. It's not an issue.
You have to take liberties because.
Like I mean, like
this is new. I've never gotten this dude on my other character, but every mission has a small chance to get you an agent. I just immediately assign him a task and say, good job. Yeah, I mostly do that stuff off screen.
Mm-hmm. It's not very interesting. It is menu-based gameplay.
A lot of the little quests are references to other things. I've gotten an Always Sunny reference, a Gremlins reference, a Jumanji reference, and I think a Nightmare on Elm Street reference, but I don't remember for sure.
That does sound about right. God, haven't seen the new Jumanji. I heard it was cheesy but good. I remember seeing.
The reboot Jumanji was good, but the second reboot Jumanji wasn't.
Yeah, I remember seeing the original movie and hating it. It was. I found it very.
I liked the original movie.
I found it very mean-spirited, I guess. It was something really cool about it.
It is a little mean-spirited in the way some 90s movies can.
Yeah, I don't know. But, yeah. What else was I... God, did I ever tell you about the Abba Udaya?
No.
Alright, so, okay. It's the mid to late 1800s in Uganda. And there's...
Is this about the failed Jewish homeland in Africa?
Nope. This has nothing to do with that. Though was one of it. I think that was actually to put it briefly, in the 1800s there were a bunch of proposed Jewish homelands elsewhere, and one of the sites was Uganda, one of the sites was Madagascar, one of the sites was Alaska, and they wrote an alternate history book about that one. But
the Yiddish Policeman's Union.
Yep.
Go read it. It's good.
But what was it? Right. This had there was a small there's a few villages, like maybe 3 villages with a few thousand people total, spread out in the somewhere in the mountains, and at that point the people, residents of these villages were animists, but they'd had Muslim clerics coming to try and convert them. Now they were having Christian missionaries who were swinging in to try to do the same, and they kind of got between the increasing social pressure and the knowledge that eventually they may have to pick a side, and whoever's side they pick and end up converting to, they may be able to call on them for, like, political influence or relief or aid or something. The leader of the village, those villages basically went, I'm going to go find out, and I'm going to bring my findings home, and whichever of the two seemed like the best bet, seemed to make the most sense, seemed to promise the most, will convert.
Oh god, I know where this is going.
Yeah, and he went abroad for years. He traveled, he talked to religious figures of both faiths, and he started hearing of another faith called Judaism that's supposedly connected to the two. He had no idea what it was at first, just that it was related. He went and he looked it up. He studied it, and he decided that he liked the sound of Judaism better than either Christianity or Islam. So
I thought you were going to say he was going to do what the Japanese did during World War II, which is take Protocols of the Elders of Zion at face value and decide, wow, these Jews are pretty powerful.
Yeah, no, no, he decided to convert, and he found a few rabbis, and sort of convinced them to come with him, and in a long series of conversions, he brought all of those villages, and they all converted to Judaism. And the news about this made it to the world's broader Jewish community decades later, and they found eventually, I think a prominent British group sent a gentleman adventurer down there to go find out what was going on, and he found in the middle of mountainous rural Uganda there were ethnic Ugandans who spoke I don't remember what the language in the area was. They spoke the language, but they also read fluent Hebrew. They conducted the ceremonies. They were actually a lot more stringent about conducting the proper ceremonies than his community was. And they faced a lot of pushback in the broader community because people questioned how valid their conversions were, because they didn't, at first at least, they didn't technically meet all the requirements for having rabbis swing by and question you. And most of that boiled down to racism. Having gone through those allegations and actually tried to figure out what it looked like, what was going on, it was very much a bunch of people who didn't want to let black people into the club. But that did get beat into people's heads after a while, though. There is a board of the board of Orthodox rabbis in Jerusalem still doesn't acknowledge them, but then they're the kind of group who think they can declare Jewish sects heretical, which is just, it's almost comical. That's if you think if they think they have that much influence.
Context for Jewish sects heretical.
I know. I swear I've told you I'm technically a heretic, right?
No, or if you did, it was long ago.
Yeah, so, okay. There's this board of rabbis I mentioned in Jerusalem. There's a board, they're ultra-Orthodox, they're basically the Orthodox Jewish community in Israel has a bunch of rabbis that they send to this board that makes decisions about the community. But they're kind of socially, they're the equivalent of the Southern Baptists within Israel.
Oh god.
They're pretty awful, and they have a bunch. They're conservative in a very they're fundamentalists. I'll put it that way. They are Jewish fundamentalists. So they have a lot of ideas about what is and isn't Jewish, and are very loud about it, but they also no one takes them seriously unless they're like in the Orthodox Jewish community of Israel. So the sect I spent most of my life in called the Reconstructionism, which I mentioned. Yeah, I told you the joke, like the Jewish weddings joke, right?
Yes, yes, I've heard that one.
That is in a Reconstructionist wedding. The rabbi and her wife are both pregnant. Like that's the outlook of Reconstructionist Judaism. And probably 20 years ago, this board declared Reconstructionism heretical and tried to expel Reconstructionists from the broader Jewish community. Like not in a very emphatic or forceful way, but just like formally condemn them as not Jewish and being awful and whatever. Which just kind of, which is kind of laughable, because that's not really a thing that you can do in Judaism. That's not like you created a theological innovation to combat theological innovations. That's just weird. But yeah, this group is the source of the greatest resistance to the Abba Yudaya being part of the broader Jewish community.
Are the Abba Yudai still in Uganda, or
Yep.
have they the black Hebrew?
I'm pretty sure they're still in Uganda. I think some of them
Okay.
emigrated, but I don't think there was ever any organized push, especially because this. I mean, like the level of influence they have is limited. Wait, Primus. First order of life, I think. Or well, first ordered life or something. That's not very good Latin, but who cares? Anyway, like they do have some influence, and they did push back, and I think they weren't like nobody. That's part of why nobody offered to airlift them or like help them immigrate or anything. But I also don't think they ever wanted to. There was no. Uganda is not a happy place, but it's also their situation
Their
was
home.
never. Yeah, it's their home, and their situation was never untenable like it was during it, like say Ethiopia in the 70s. So they're still around, still doing their thing, and they are basic. The Abadiyah are basically practicing Orthodox Jews, and they live in their villages and live their lives to this day.
Well, that answers my question if you answer.
What?
I'm sorry.
Yams? Like
if you've ever
think
had to
so.
read, if you ever had English class in the past 20 years, you probably read Things Fall Apart,
Yeah.
and that is a book from an African perspective about colonialism.
Mhm.
And a large part of it revolves around the regular yam crop.
Yeah. I mean, that's an
That
entirely.
was it. That was just a little joke for those
I
of
mean,
us who had to read that book.
I mean, fair. I actually like that book. A lot of people don't.
Oh
It's one of
no,
those like.
it's a good book. It's just one of those books you have to read so
Yeah,
everyone gives a
it's
shit.
everyone. Yeah. And
It's like
also,
Hatchet. Hatchet's a good book, but you
Mhm.
have to read it for English class, and a lot of people are
we
like, oh.
we had a book called Ceremony that we had to read. I don't know if you ever read it.
Doesn't sound familiar.
It's a Native American from Arizona going back, and there's a lot of talk about witches. That was basically our teacher. It was huge, and they had us go through it as a major unit. Our teachers told us read it twice, and you'll like it. And we were like, we're high school students. We're not reading a 300 something page book twice. And I got bored, and near the end of the unit, actually started it again. And having read it all the way through, I breezed through it again and actually liked it the second time. They were right. They're still asking too much of high schoolers, though. So that's because it was dense and it was dark. It was real dark. So it was not an easy read.
I once I took a English course in college on it was on magical realism,
Yeah.
And we had to read this book by this Hispanic guy set in Mexico, and I cannot remember what the book series was called for the life of me. But I do remember that he got involved in some stuff and is accused of murder. Like, someone he mentioned in the book went missing, and he was like the last person seen with them. So,
Visual tracking initiated.
But yeah, oh man. Oh, look. Let's see, how far are we? How far do you think we are from the Hebrew mission?
Hebrew Mission is very last part of the video.
Mhm.
So,
So I have time to talk about literary fiction bingo.
yeah.
Have I don't know if I've ever done this rant on air. Because this is...
No.
Okay, so, okay. I when I went in my undergrad, I went to a college that was known for having a creative writing degree. And I'm looking at what is, like, this is... I think they actually did get Roman architecture right here. Because people usually mix it up with Greek, and they're different in the same way, like, British English and American English are different. You can immediately tell if you're very familiar, but if you're not, they are the same language, you know. But and I missed my chance to kind of talk. Well, I don't know if I missed my chance to talk about it, but
No,
yeah, I
keep
did.
going.
Yeah, there's just I kind of talked all I want about Rome and
Oh,
ancient
about Rome. I
Greece.
thought you were talking about the literary thing. No,
I
talk about
like
literary
yeah,
bingo.
yeah. I'll talk about there's stuff plenty more Rome to do, but that's for Romania, and so I don't think I missed too much of a chance. But literary fiction bingo. Okay. Undergraduate, I went to a college that's known for its creative writing program, and I went because I wanted to write. And it's weird. It's funny. Like, I mean, ILP. I ended up using it. I use the stuff I learned there every day in my job. It's very important, but I don't use it as I thought I would. But it was still very useful, and it was still a very good program. But they had this issue. And they had this issue. This issue was that the people they had assigned to teach writing came from an extremely specific literary tradition that thought it wasn't specific. So let me go back a bit. Like when we talk about literary genres, what comes to mind for you?
Science fiction, fantasy, noir.
Um,
What a magical realism, because I took that course.
yeah. So genre as we think of it today is actually a very recent development. The idea of these it's basically marketing categories that places you can put things Khalid is here.
Romans are restless in their graves. I hear them every night in my dreams. Their whispers are insistent. The ancient Romans, child. Legionaries of the Roman Empire.
Damn it, I wanted there's multiple things that I could talk about, but
Part of a crumbling empire, worshipping a dying god.
if they were proper legion, yeah,
Sol
that's
Invictus.
I can guarantee you for a fact there was no legion that all worshipped the same god. By the halfway through the height of the Roman Empire.
What he's saying, the cult was dissolved and scattered. The most zealous fled here. So this particular legion was made of members who were zealous.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
coalesced here.
yeah, I guess. That's fair, but that's also not how Roman militaries worked, especially not in this region. Like by this point, by the late Empire, there were very few soldiers actually in Egypt. Egypt was one of its heartlands. Egypt was like one of its most important areas and one of the people didn't put armies here because if you controlled Egypt, you controlled grain supplies in the eastern half of the empire. So no emperor was stupid enough to put armies anywhere near the place because whoever was in charge could make a run at being emperor, and a few did. But I don't know. That's
Do you think that's tobacco or marijuana?
I think it's probably tobacco. I
I seem to remember the ancient Scythians were renowned for their marijuana use.
Get to it.
that's questionable. There's actually like they probably did use drugs, but different drugs. Marijuana is, as we know it, is like relatively recent. I think it's a New World variety of hemp. But
Really?
yeah, we like didn't have they didn't have marijuana as we know it. They had hemp plants, but cultivating marijuana as a hallucinogen is pretty recent. We know that people in the ancient world used hallucinogens all the time. Like the Greeks were I wouldn't say they're fond of them, but they had a lot of cults. Like they called them mysteries, basically, where people would get just they just get high as fuck and trip in the mountains in a group and come back having do it as basically a religious experience. So
Like peyote.
pretty much, yeah. It's pretty closely analogous. Though in those cases they had specific like cults that had specific beliefs, and they would even export them from city to city.
The reason I'm surprised at that is I seem to remember reading an article ancient Korean funerary traditions and cannabis. I cannot for the life of me remember where I read it.
You never know. Like, and speaking as someone who is sympathetic to legalizing marijuana, people who like to promote it are really prone to making shit up. So I wouldn't be like, I don't know if you got this out of like an actual news source or if this is just something you saw. Because like if you did, maybe there's something else that I'm not aware of. But
they specifically said cannabis instead of marijuana. So
but, like, what kind of source? Where were you reading this? Is my question.
It was a personal article from someone talking about their experiences in Korea with Korean cultural censorship.
That
like censorship of the past and things that were previously done to build a new image.
Yeah.
Like there is no prostitution in Korea. But I can hire a call girl. There is no prostitution in Korea.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
It was an article like that in which I read it. So
I'm willing to bet that was like, I know there's a significant shamanic tradition throughout East Asia, especially Korea and Japan, to the point that like if you've seen enough anime to see a shrine maiden.
Yeah.
That's basically what they are. That's what they're supposed to do. And one of the core ideas behind shamanic practices is contacting spirits and dealing with them and appeasing them. Though appeasing is often not quite the right word. Sometimes it's very confrontational, sometimes very supportive. In a lot of East Asian traditions, it is very supportive. But fun fact,
anyway,
actually.
we got way off topic from literary bingo.
Yeah, and now I have now I'm looking at stuff that I can talk about with the Roman Empire.
Tell literary bingo, because next we do the Hebrew thing.
All right, I'll focus. I'll try to focus. So there's genre is a recent invention. The idea that genres are fundamentally different, and think that they should be divided, is something that dates back to like the end of the Second World War, when they were hammering down like mass paperback markets. The thing about this is that as they were doing this, they did eventually create a genre for what they considered fine art, for literary fiction. And the group that practiced literary fiction kind of got convinced that those genre conventions weren't actually like genre conventions that readers liked and that existed because that's just that's just how that genre worked. They got convinced those genre conventions were hallmarks of good literature, period. and
Oh my god,
that's
those people.
that's how that's a big part of where this. I mean, people have always been elitist about different kinds of literature, but usually that was more due to class, and this was a refinement of that. And basically, like, people talk about how every book how many books out there are about depressed English professors cheating on their wives. But there is a very when I was going through this, my teachers were often really uncomfortable with the strong, like, people. A lot of people were much more interested in writing fantasy or science fiction or various things that could consider genre than their realistic fiction, and they were not shy about saying so, and trying to, like, limit how much we could write, and trying to make us write other things as a way of exploring and whatever. And it never actually convinced anyone that they taught to write more realistic fiction. But, like, and I got to the point where I started coming up, and they also assigned us books. They assigned us books they said were good literature, the stuff that we should be reading. And those books were, I came up near the end of my time in that college, after I'd gotten out of the worst of this, by the time I just got into, like, workshops, because that's what the program looked like, it was like, I started drawing up bingo. And if you had bingo, if you picked up a piece of literary fiction, the idea was you read it through, and then you go to the bingo card. And on this card, I wrote all sorts of things, but these are things like...
we're gonna have to table that now.
Damn it.
We're about to do the Hebrew one.
Okay. I have been very...
This is the one I mentioned before.
Yeah, I have been very disorganized.
Yeah.
Now, my brother, he likes.
Yeah, that's where I said.
We have a complicated history, but we've learned to coexist.
It's kind of odd since, like, the burning bush in the Bible is God, unambiguously. And there's a lot of speculation on what that actually means, like what a bush burning without fire touching any of its leaves or anything. And we were speaking of peyote. There's a lot of speculation about whether he was tripping balls in the desert, and he had met God out in the desert, and that influenced his life. But there's all sorts of concepts and meaning tied into it. And fun thing about that staff, by the way, do you know why Moses was not allowed to actually enter Israel?
He pissed off God somehow.
Yep. 4 and 60 that he mentioned, by the way, very important. Not a Judaism thing, but this game thing. And it has to do with the Third Age. But it's one of the it's one of those background elements that doesn't really do things. But anyway, it's part of. I think I mentioned before that as the prophet of God, Moses was given the right to perform miracles. And I've talked about how there's a lot of strains of Judaism think that he wasn't given any magical powers beyond being just told the name of God, the Tetragrammaton, and he could just say it, and whatever would happen would happen. He's said, and if you look at the Bible, whenever something fantastical happens around Moses, he usually says or does something to prompt it. There's almost always a vocal component. But there came a point where, as they were closing in on the outskirts of, the Holy Land, water was running low. And at one point, Moses got mad and he got frustrated, and he told water to come out of a rock, and it didn't. So he got angry, he hit the rock with his staff, and then water came out. And after that, he was told by God, you don't get to go to the Holy Land anymore. And in fact, you have to wander those 40, that's why they spent 40 years in the desert.
Because Moses
Moses.
Moses got a little angry, and God was like, "Well, you should have been a better person."
I mean, yeah. On one hand, yes. On the other hand, by the way, fun fact about that. I've talked earlier about the Hebrew letter. We talked about Hebrew letters and vowels and vowel sounds. Those little dots underneath the letters, those are what those vowels are. So, and since those are relatively, like, they're based on older things, but since those are relatively recent, that does kind of, if they are, that does mean that these can't possibly be ancient, that old. So there you go. And this is you. I see this is you just going, I'm not figuring this out.
Yeah, I took one look at that and I was like, "That's Hebrew. I don't speak Hebrew."
Well,
Of course, I also have to translate Arabic to Hebrew and then back.
I mean, the Hebrew alphabet is like relatively simple, all things told. Um, it has one sound that English doesn't, and it lacks several sounds that English has. And for the most part, even if you're trying to read it, that sound that it doesn't have can just be, said with an H. It's pronounced. I don't know if the mic picked that up. We call it the Mediterranean H. If you've ever eaten challah, it's pronounced challah. Or I kind of choked on my spit there. It's pronounced challah. And that gets a lot of people kind of frustrated, and that's why if you look at it in a store, sometimes it will be spelled with an H and sometimes with a CH. But yeah, the Hebrew script is not actually a Hebrew script. There is a separate Hebrew script. They call it Paleo Hebrew. It doesn't look anything like that. That is Aramaic. That's the Aramaic script, which was developed during the exile and adopted by the community during Babylonian captivity, as they called it. And they brought it back, and since it was more sensible and easier to use and a lot more compact than Paleo Hebrew, they just used that alphabet. And now most of the world knows it as the Hebrew alphabet because mostly they talk about Hebrew. But a lot of prayers are actually written in Aramaic as well as Hebrew. And not a lot of people know that. And not a lot of people are able to actually tell the difference. But they're not mutually intelligible. They're entirely different languages. So that trips up a lot of scholars trying to research things and finding out that, no, actually, I'm completely misreading this. I have to learn something else entirely. But yeah. Anyway, I got distracted. We were talking about... Is that the puzzle, or are there more?
Yeah, that's the Hebrew puzzle. You have to sign out, write the names of the plagues of Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah. I never got enough of a chance to talk about literary bingo, but it was on this card was stuff like has more than one hobby, or has exactly one hobby, or does not have a social life that or is not involved in any political movement. Another is not involved in any social movement. Another is not involved in any religious movement. Is not involved in any family, broader family. And these got really specific. I was talking some of these squares are white, male, straight, but some of them were has exactly one recreational activity. And the idea was if you looked at this and you found any 5, not in a row, any 5 that weren't true. And if you found 5 that weren't true in a row, 5 that weren't true and marked them down, you said bingo and declared it magical realism. Because we were basically told, magical realism is an actual literary movement from South and Central America with a lot of specific cultural trappings. And the term has been adopted by literary fiction writers to refer to anything that doesn't meet literary fiction genre conventions, but feels like literary fiction, so that they can kind of grandfather it in, and they can still pretend that it's literary fiction, but. And the idea is, and if you do have any 5 of those in an actual row, you declare it genre and dismiss anything the author writes ever again. It was a frustrating time, and
I can imagine.
these people they were like some of them. Sometimes, yeah, but they were like they had very specific ideas of what you could do with a piece of literature and what you could say. Like it was an emotional monotone. There are three emotions you're allowed to feel in literary fiction, and those are depression, alienation, and wonder. Every other emotion is allowed as a temporary reprieve from one of those three, and that's a very limited palette. That's like there aren't any. Those are not. Those are very personal emotions, and those are very sustained emotions. You don't get much anger. You don't get much love. You don't get much like hate. You don't get much joy. You don't get much anything that has any real like psychological sticking power. It's just you have to focus on those few things and how everything goes back to those few things. And it got so repetitive, so boring. But that's what they liked to read, and that's what they thought was good literature. So they tried to convince us that that's what good literature was. And more often than not, it didn't work. And the people it did work on often never wrote anything again after they got out, because they just sort of learned that, well, I'm now writing literature, and literature kind of sucks, so I'm bored writing. But mostly they just took what they could use from it and then did their own thing. And that wasn't actually that common. It didn't spoil. We didn't spoil too many careers, and a lot of the times that it was spoiled. Well, the thing about writing is that writing actually is boring if you want to do it in any kind of quantity, and it can get grinding and frustrating. The idea is figuring out how to minimize that and how to work through it when it happens. So there were a lot of people who found out, actually, I like writing, but I do not have the stamina to do it long form. I was one of those, but then I was able to actually break that with an LP. Or actually, well, technically I broke it with Fatal and Friends reviews, but I was able to actually tell a story using the LP format because I was able to alternate between talking just about random Pokemon stuff and talking about the fiction and actually telling the story. But that's not something that would my teachers, like one of my teachers there, the good one that I had, the guy who was present and leading his students into Washington in the 60s to join protests, he would have found it weird as hell, but understandable. The rest would have been very disappointed in me, and me being proud of that. But it's because it's speculative fiction. It's very weird by their standards, even though I've actually had people leave comments about how they were inspired to write themselves and embrace parts of their identity more because of what they read. And that's a very high compliment to pay a writer. And I did it about a piece of Pokemon fan fiction, basically. And
what was this?
This is my Pokemon Shield LP.
Oh, okay. Is that on the archive?
Yep.
Okay, I'll have to read that.
But
that was pretty much it.
And that was pretty much it.
You will notice that the staff turns into a snake and returns to the bush.
Special assignment received.
That is what I'm doing. I follow it and it returns to the bush near Khalid. Which is a nice reference to when Moses turned those staffs into snakes.
And nice little bit and with that bit of parallelism, that's not the actual literary term, but I didn't listen to everything my teachers told me, as you can tell. We can go ahead and wrap that video up. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.